the hour being after 6 o'clock, I'm going to call the January 19th budget hearing to order. Start with the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Can I get a motion?
I make a motion to open the public hearing.
Second. Okay, motion by Nancy, second by Jen. All those in favor? All right, should we hand it over to Mr. Frisha to start off the comprehensive budget?
Okay, so we'll start with the comprehensive budget, which is an overview of our basically our operating budget and other revenue sources. So I assume everyone has a copy. On the left-hand column of the comprehensive budget is local appropriations. So we're going to begin by talking about the local dollars that are funded through the town. The left-hand column is the actual FY22 expenditures. The middle column is budget FY23, and the column that's most critical for this conversation is the request for FY24. And then we have the net difference column and the percent changes for each one of those items. So starting with the first line, our personnel budget, I'll focus on 23 versus 24 and the net difference. So our budgeted personnel budget for FY23 was $43,678,977, and our request this year for the school committee is $46,484,371. That's a net difference of $2,805,394, and that is a percent change of 5.5 as compared to the entirety of the budget, or on that line, 6.4 would be the percent change. So that is our personnel budget. Last year, we had additional positions totaling $1,303,000, and this year we have a total of $115,000 position requests to the personnel budget. So when you add that request in, the new adjusted personnel budget with the additional positions is $46,599,371, which is a net change of $1,617,394, or 3.15% of our total budget, 3.6 on this line. Our goods and service budget for FY23 was $6,412,677, and our FY24 request is $6,939,129, which is an increase of $526,452, or a 1% increase of that line, or 8% of the total budget, 1%, or 8.2 of that line. So a considerable increase in the goods and service budget this year in our request. So the total school request this year is $53,538,500, which all in is an increase of $2,143,846. That's the school department's requested budget, which is a 4.2% increase for personnel and goods and services total in that amount. The town administrator, when this document was done, was at $53,062,050, which was a net difference of $476,450. We refer to that as our gap. And that funding from the town administrator would have a total 3.2%. Since then, Jim Johnson added $235,000 to his recommended budget, leaving us with an updated gap of $240,000, which I believe is 3.7% increase as recommended by the town administrator. So in the documents we were working with the other night, we were talking about $240,000 difference. Any questions on the town appropriated budget?
I had a question about the person, like above that. Personnel total, the percentages for the personnel, and then the adjusted personnel. So like columns F and G, the first one and the third one.
Yep.
Why is there such a difference?
So the $1,303,000 in the budgeted FY23 budget is not included, so it's not at all in. The positions were separated, and that's a substantial increase. When you roll, I have the same question. When you roll it into the budget, it looks like a really substantial increase, but it's only because we separated the personnel
Because we didn't
budget.
know we were gonna have it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
okay.
positions. And that's how we generally flow that.
Okay, and the first line about personnel, when we talked about the difference is 2,805,000, that very first line. Can you give us a breakdown of, like, most of it I know is collective bargaining, but what else is in there besides collective bargaining?
So what makes up the 2,805,000, you'd have to go back to the 1,303,000, right? Because that wasn't included in the personnel number
gotcha.
originally, right? So
Yep,
there's that
okay.
number, plus collective bargaining, the total, right, which is $1,300,000 approximately
Yep,
for our this year's collective bargaining. And then the FY24 Medicaid increase, or reduction actually, is causing an increase in our budget. So with Medicaid dropping and that source of funding going down, we had to roll into our personnel budget because that is reflected in personnel. So those increases total at $2,805,000. I know it seems like a big number, but it's really somewhat about the way we report it. I think the more critical number is the adjusted personnel number if you're looking at actual increases overall.
thanks.
Motion carries.
All right, so the next section is what we call reimbursement, section B. And it includes reimbursements such as circuit breaker. We categorize circuit breaker carryover in that area, Medicaid, and Kenny-Bento reimbursement for homeless transportation. So starting with circuit breaker number. The budget number in FY23 was $2,004,000. Our estimated budget number for circuit breaker this year, or FY24, is $1,661,827. That's a drop off of $342,173, or 17% decrease in that line item. Circuit breaker is directly related to reimbursements for tuitions in the special ed budget, and it's an offset that increases it over a formula of about $45,000. Everything 75% above, everything above $45,000 is tuition expense. 75% of that is reimbursed through circuit breaker. Over the last few years, we've had a drop off in our tuition lines, which we benefited from, and like last year, we were able to use that to offset some of our positions. But the net downside to that is that your circuit breaker number drops, and there's a lag of 1 year that's there. So we're going to have to, and we have incorporated a $342,000 decrease into our numbers overall. So we've accounted for that drop off in circuit breaker. The next line is circuit breaker carryover. We had last year anticipated $1,301,680 for carryover of savings from prior years in circuit breaker, and I anticipate that next year will be approximately the same. So we just kind of roll that forward. If we have savings at year end, we may put that into the circuit breaker number and roll it forward, so it could come up, but that's not a number that we have at this point by any stretch. So at this point, circuit breaker carryover is level funded. Moving down to the next item is Medicaid reimbursement. Last year we budgeted $450,000, but if you notice to the left, our actual reimbursement was $665,000. That money was used to offset salaries within the personnel line items as well as some goods and service items. This year we're anticipating the $450,000, and that looks like what we're going to get next year as well. So we are dropping our number down by approximately $200,000 in there, and that's the number that was reflected up above in the personnel number, the drop off of $200,000. And then McKinney-Vento, reimbursement for homeless transportation. Homeless transportation has been relatively stable. We also have a budget within our operating budget that's not reimbursable, and that has sufficed to cover any kind of homeless transportation. And as you can see, we haven't got any reimbursement for that from the state. They reimburse homeless transportation. Any questions about that section?
Sorry, just to be clear, the 342,000 decrease in circuit breaker, did you put all of it into what we need to do in personnel, or is it split between personnel and goods and services?
It's actually all of goods and services. It's all
Okay.
tuition related.
Okay.
So it is into John's number. So in John budgets, he dropped his offset of circuit breaker in his budget. And you can see that was in the budget pages.
On McKinney-Vento, zero, we just talked about it, and there's some years it's been,
Any issue with that this year?
We did not, our homeless transportation is pretty minimal at this point, so that's why we haven't. I think if you talk to a district that has a lot of homeless transportation, they would still have an issue, but they've tried to address that with reimbursements.
Okay, just checking, because I know we written a letter in the past on that, so.
Okay, no other questions? The offsets down at the bottom, so good news is our full-day kindergarten tuition collection went away last year with it being fully funded within the appropriated budget, meaning the teachers who were paid out of the full-day K tuition collections are no longer paid that way, they're paid through the operating budget. So we no longer collect revenue to charge those teachers off, so they're fully funded. Transportation, we're looking at $338,000 in collections of bus fees, and that's about $13,000 increase. That's an estimate. It trended up a little bit higher than that, so probably in the middle of what that would be. Athletic fees and receipts is relatively level funded, not any really big changes in that. Boosters Club contributions are again pretty static. Things are status quo. They're paid for the same kind of coaches or ice time or things that the Boosters Club contribute to, which is obviously substantial at $300,000. Moving down to preschool, we have a $30,000 increase. I think that's pretty much directly related to the enrollment increase. The program's running really well, really strong, well subscribed to. And I think, Julie, you guys are full for next year, right? So that's that $30,000 increase. Moving down to the next item, extended day. The balance in the account is approximately $515,000, which is about a $40,000 increase. Devin Clifford's doing an amazing job running that program, and it continues to grow and be really a healthy revenue source. If times got difficult, we had to write off salaries. We can use that account. We also charge currently 6 custodians to the extended day account. If we didn't have that revenue, we didn't have that source, those would be charged to the operating budget. That $300,000 would come out of our operating budget. So a very important account. Extracurricular activities, basically level funded at $40,000, and parking roughly level funded as well for the collections of the high school. Steve, I think it's 200 a parking spot that we collect for those, correct? Giving us a total of $1,750,240 in that category for offsets. Any questions on that category?
I would just like to say it's wonderful to not have kindergarten tuition in here. So, big accomplishment to be able to say that.
It's freed up a lot of manpower in my office, and that we're not, going after people for collecting past due balances and stuff. So it's been a tremendous savings in labor in addition to the benefits, obviously, to the community.
It felt like it took 100 years, but it's a good thing. It's a moment to celebrate, I guess.
Absolutely. And then at the bottom, we have grants, which unfortunately, at this point in the year, I generally level fund everything because we just don't know what the grants will be funded at. I think that 240, our largest grant, is incrementally increased. but it's not enough to keep up with the growing costs of our ESPs or other service providers, procedural assistants, those types of people that are in that grant. We lose ground even though the grant goes up, and you'll see some of that reflected in the future FTE report, because we have to move people out of grants into the operating budget every year. It tends to be a trend. So I just,
Like the grant doesn't go up every year either, sometimes it goes down.
goes down to,
Occasionally.
okay, which would obviously have a really detrimental, right? You lose the revenue and then the cost increase.
Yeah, we won't know until August. That's what it
So it's not intentional that I'm doing this to understate it, it's just that that's what we get our actual figures. So if you look at the overall budget, the new budget would be overall, all included, $60,400,089, which is a difference of $1,885,913, which is a 3.2% increase overall for all areas within the budget. So,
So looking at the goods and services, obviously, we just talked about that. You can see that that's a significant increase, and that's a combination between our central services, our buildings, technology, special ed, which Dr. Billy discussed, and a minimal increase in our school goods and services. So why don't we start with goods and services for the schools, and we just talk about any highlights and how we funded, but some of the highlights, where your offsets might be for some increases or priorities for the upcoming years. We'll start with Julie.
Great, right. Yeah, so as Bridget said, we've been level funded. This year, we have a $5,000 increase in our goods and services budget. And primarily that's due just to the significant growth over the past few years of the program. The enrollment and also just the needs of the kids. So really you'll notice from year to year, we tend to stay the same. Line 53, it's really our supply line that has the biggest increase, as you'll note there, and that's true. Just the materials alone that we use in preschool, between like paper and laminate and sensory materials, and we create so many individual materials for individual children that it's a large increase, but it's used and it's exhausted throughout the year between both of our speech and language therapists, occupational therapy, physical therapy, 7 kids, 7 teachers, and then all the children. So that's that's the most significant allocation that we have. And again, I think that's due, and the cost of everything is rising, but certainly just what we go through, and the class sizes and the student need is really, you'll note the biggest increase. And from that, we can also take a look at, we're exploring more, and I think I've mentioned this in the past too, like looking at different ways to modify the environment, either with different seating. But we're seeing and needing a lot more sensory materials to help support kids, either through heavy work materials, sensory, like use like sand bins, rice bins, right now, like it's a winter theme, for example, so all the water bins, it's like ice and Arctic animals and plastic ice cubes that we're putting in the freezer every night. But those things, they over time add up. So that's what we're seeking. I think that's the line that I would draw your attention to the most. Everything else more or less remains the same. So I don't know if you have specific questions.
Mine isn't so much about the goods and services, but just general enrollment. Like over the last couple of years, have you seen more kids who need to come to the preschool? I mean, I know your enrollment has gone up, and I'm assuming it's because we have more kids with special needs that
Yes.
need to come.
Yes, definitely. Last year and this year, this year, it's a high number, and there's a lot of reasons. You know, we know who's coming through early intervention, but there are also a lot of students that are coming to us unidentified that have, you know, moderate to higher needs. And this seems to be a trend, at least in my job, like with other districts. But yes, we're seeing more, much more of those moderate to high needs. So right now, I just looked at our numbers. So for example, right now we have, 55 students at the preschool who are receiving special education services, and another 15 who are what we call itinerant services. So they walk in to get their services. They're not enrolled as students, so they might come for speech, for example. So that's 70 total. And we have, right now, we have 10 open, ongoing evaluations in process. And our current enrollment as of today is 107. So we're expecting that number certainly to rise.
Thanks, that's useful. We mentioned the other night that we're trying to have a legislative breakfast, and it's coming together. So one of the things that we're going to be asking is for help with the circuit breaker for, kids that are out of district. But we were on a phone call with the selectmen the other day, and they were saying if we could make a case like you were just making, that it's not a Walpole thing, you're hearing it from other districts too, that just the needs of the young kids are the number and the needs are increasing. So I'm going to get in touch with you, because I couldn't take notes that fast, but that's good. Thank you.
Is it fair to say that a lot of kiddos that might have been picked up by early intervention during the pandemic were not, simply because they maybe were more confined to their homes, or in early intervention services, the delivery changed?
Yes,
and
so
all of that?
that's a multifaceted answer. So that part of that is, yes, maybe some kids were not identified because as everything did close down. When early intervention opened back up, it was all via telehealth. As we know, pediatrician, doctors visit sometimes went via telehealth. So I think that certainly, like, there's perhaps, some impact of maybe children in otherwise typical times were able to receive early intervention services. And for example, like, EI, a big part of what EI does are the play groups at Thome and Norwood and at Enable, and they have been able to do that. And I think everybody else, they're still coming back to with their staffing. So I think it's a multi-layered answer, Carrie, it's certainly not, one layer, but I think that definitely played, a component. And EI, we have a great relationship with both Thome and Enable, and they send us a referral list for like the whole year and beyond, so we can kind of mark who we think but it's a moving number, because we don't, and it's the same with the other schools too. Like you can kind of think about who you are expecting to come, but then of course, like, people move to town, or a child may have more significant needs than you originally thought they may have had. So
I think that's the issue. Some of the things Julie and I talk almost daily.
I think it's both identification, but I think without early intervention for the last couple of years, by the time the kids turn 3, the severity is such that where it would be sort of mitigated if EI were in play. Now we're seeing much more severe kids by the time they're 83 because they didn't have EI. So I think it's both identification and the severity now once they're getting 3 years old and they become under our charge. That's the piece that I'm seeing. Our moderate
Yes.
and more severe
and more
needs
severe
is
what we're
growing a
seeing.
lot faster than our little guys.
Good evening. I'm going to speak to the elementary goods and services budget and highlight 3 specific line items. So the first one that we would like to bring your attention to is budget line item 30. We were incredibly fortunate to bring a new math program to K-5 this year for Bridges and Number Corner. So what we have added here is the component of student workbooks to practice and reinforce concepts used. So that is an addition for all 4 elementary schools. The second is line item 53, and I'm really going to echo everything that Julie said. And due to inflation, we've seen a large cost increase of supplies needed for the daily function of our schools and really to meet our students' needs. So a few of the examples that we've been researching are something like a pallet of paper in FY22 costs around $1,100, and for FY23 it was up by $600. So, right, around, yeah, so and we use approximately 3 pallets of paper per school year, so that's a large increase just there. Something like pencils, FY22, I know it seems minimal, but $1.15 per dozen, FY23, $3.33 per dozen. So we've seen a pretty significant increase on dry erase markers that we use for foundations, and even our laminating system. So our lamination rolls have increased by $75. Post-its, whiteboards, you name it, we've seen an increase. So there will be that noted on line item 53. And the last budget item we would like to bring your attention to is line item 67, our tech instructional software. And we have included the addition of Forefront software to be added, and that's an effective tool for administrators as well as teachers to collect and analyze data. Specifically right now for Bridges math assessments, but it does have the capacity for us to do the same with literacy, so foundations and Lucy Calkins at the elementary level. And those are our 3 highlights. So therefore, our goods and services budget has increased from years past.
A question about
Sure.
the math program. So I remember sort of at the beginning of Bridges, there was potentially an addition of manipulatives or extra supplies in addition to the workbooks. Are you sort of good with that within the budget, or is that workbooks in addition to some of those other elements? I know like phase 1 was maybe not buying all of those, and then you're sort of growing into that. So is that part of that budget as well?
One of the beautiful things about utilizing our packs has been, there have been some items that would really enhance our program. Household items that we've asked our packs to help us collect, like paper towel rolls, or brown paper bags, or plastic water bottles that people have used and want to recycle to us. So we've had fantastic contributions that way. But the workbooks were part of the entire package that we received and have been extremely successful in that carryover. But because they're consumables, we have added them to our operating budgets for FY24. So we do have them this school year as well.
A lot of the manipulatives probably would not need to be replaced in the first year, but I do imagine for the principals, their goods and services will incorporate that in the years as well.
Yeah, I just didn't know how many of those you got in the first phase of Bridges,
Yeah.
right? Or if that was like a new phase. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we got a lot.
We have all of
We
them.
got a lot.
Oh, okay.
But there were a lot of the consumables have been filled in, like Carrie said, through the packs,
Yeah.
the resources. We're hoping in year 2, we still have a lot of those manipulatives that are not consumables that have stayed in the classroom.
Right. I was a little, we received all the manipulatives
Sure.
needed in the entire package to run the program, but then there was this second piece I thought you were referring to, which was like, it would be wonderful if you had these.
No, and I
items
do
to
remember
hand.
some of that as well. Yeah, great.
And also on, so in our math instruction line on the back to 30, we do have, sorry, one second. So like when I'm speaking to Elm, exactly like you were saying, we will need to replace some of those manipulatives and other tools and resources just for our math curriculum in general. So there is math tools and resources on here, for example, $3,000 at Elm for exactly those pieces you're referring to. Sean?
I was wondering if you guys could talk about the difference in the tech supplies line. It's fairly different across all of the schools. I'm just wondering if we have a new program. I don't know if that is involved in any of that, but what why some schools might be significantly higher, why some might be lower, what is being used there. Just the background is just concerned about the equity of programs and what all the students are accessing heading up into what will be a unified middle school.
Line item.
Line item 67?
56. So I was taking that as just like the tools that somebody might use in a class, being labeled as tech supplies.
I have quoted for copy machines on 56.
Yeah, so across the board, that's just ink and toner for
Oh.
our copiers and printers.
And, I mean, I don't want to speak to their specific budget, but some of the reasons why you might see differences in the number, and I know this because actually Bridget has experience in middle schools, is that there might be some programmatic needs in the building that require more toner, more ink, or color copies, or lamination, things like that.
Yeah, okay. I just assumed technology supplies would be like something that, no, I mean, the software's pretty well laid out there, but equipment that we used in instruction of students, robots, things like that. I don't necessarily see a line for it specifically. So that's just my misreading of it.
So, it might just be in different places, some of those items, but are you talking more about like instructional materials for like coding and VBOTs and those types of things?
Yeah,
Like makerspace, so for instance, that's on line 66 for Elm. And that's to enhance student learning. A lot of those pieces for our STEM curriculum. That's where we've included that type of equipment: printers, cameras, document cameras, VBOTs, instructional materials for coding, Go Box, green screen, makerspace materials.
I think we've done a fair amount of that purchasing COVID funding, the past 2-3 years. We've been fortunate to bring in a lot of technology. Now our challenge is, what Tom had presented, is maintaining all this equipment and replacing it.
Good evening. I'm pleased to present a budget request for Johnson Middle School for fiscal year '24 that is level funded. There have been slight movements in the reallocations within individual lines, but the bottom line amount being requested is the same amount as the current year's budget. Some items of note in line 30. You will see an increase in our request for math instructional equipment. That request includes funding for the Delta Math, the Delta Math program, which the department is now using as an instructional and diagnostic tool. Fiscal year '24 would be the first year the program would be built into the budget at the school level. We're currently in a pilot year, we're doing that. We also have, at Johnson, we have made adjustments to some areas of allocations to ensure that the departments with the highest use of consumable materials such as art and science have necessary funding available to them next year. You'll also note that there's a reduction in line 37, which is foreign language instructional equipment. That's actually not really a reduction, but rather a reallocation. We've moved those funds into the instructional technology line, which is our software line that the elementary schools was mentioning. That's where we streamline all the various digital subscriptions used by our academic departments. And in this case, we'll be moving away from hard copy books for foreign language and toward the adoption of Extempore, a digital platform that allows increased opportunities to practice and assess skills in other aids of listening and speaking that workbooks cannot provide. So that's our coverage. Share questions.
Thank you, everybody. One of the things that I enjoy about budget season is that I get the opportunity to ask the staff what are some of the things that they need to be successful in in school. And you'll see in Bird's budget that some of the numbers have gone up and down depending on what the departments need, because it's not always going to be the same thing. So in some of the areas, like Steve mentioned, same thing for us, line 30, Delta Math, it went up 100% because we added in the number of dollars we needed to pay for our portion of the subscription. But then if you notice, in 31, 33, and 35, all those numbers went down. But that's because when I asked the teachers what they're looking for, this is what they requested. It just happened to be less than what they requested last year. But that opened up possibilities for other departments as well. For instance, like if you look at line 36, our remedial reading budget went way up by 214% because our reading teacher felt like, she needed to have her own library of the novels that the students are reading throughout the ELA experience from grades 6, 7, 8. So we made sure to give her enough money to be able to buy books just that she can keep writing her room for her kids if they happen to forget it, when they're bringing it to reading class. Line 40, I just wanted to note, like music, you'll see that went down by 25%. And it's not because we're doing less music, but I think it's mostly due to the fact that we have 2 brand new music teachers at Bird Middle School, and that they're not exactly sure exactly what we have versus what they need. So while it might be lower this year, it could increase next year as they get kind of used to what we have and what they want to do. But Sean, to talk about your particular question on like line 56, tech supplies, ours went down. And one of the reasons the BMS tech supply budget went down is because our digital learning coach, Dave Cuzzy, has doing a really good job about not hoarding, but he keeps things in good supply, so that he has saved things that we haven't used in the past, and he went through his whole inventory and says, I have enough that I don't need to order as much as I have in the past, because I want to reuse this stuff before I buy anything new. So we have some materials that we've kind of hung on to in the past, and that's why our budget went down there. But in 57, like Steve mentioned, 66, that's where we have the majority, actually almost all of our subscriptions are in there. And in 65 is where we use, Sean, that's our tech classroom instruction. So that's where we have, at Bird, my teacher asked for a new 3D printer. He asked for new mats for his robot competitions. And that's why that budget went up 184%, because he needed something new. And based on the way other people asked for things, it opened up avenues for me to be able to help him get what he needed. And that's about, those are the highlights of Bird.
And just to note, Ed is talking about it, I didn't have it in front of me, but it's important to note he doesn't have $1 million budget. Schools, like in this case, it's 91,900. So when the remedial reading goes up 214%, it's from $225 to whopping $800. So, but it just is reflected on that as the overall budget. And say, like your music is 2,000, goes down to 1,500. Like, so I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks for getting into the weeds.
If she didn't, I was going to.
Okay.
Yeah, because we have a listening audience to pay attention to.
Yes, I know.
And it is informative to know that we are looking at every $10 or $100 that we spend.
Right. Every $1,000 counts.
Yeah.
So, knock on wood, and all things being equal, the 23-24 school year is going to be the final school year of 2 middle schools in Walpole, and I'm just imagining that as we start to think about combining the populations of Johnson and Bird with our current 6th graders, there'll be 7th graders next year, and the incoming 6th, like, are we considering anything we might need to budget for in terms of programming, either for students or families, to begin to build that joint middle school community? If there might be certain initiatives that we want to take, for example, I know, some districts for their 5th graders that are coming up to middle school, they'll do like a unity day, and they'll have a day where they ship them all to one place and they intermix them by school, and it's an attempt to sort of build relationships, that sort of thing. Or, a joint music performance perhaps, right? Like 2 ensembles from both schools working on this. anything like that, are we starting to consider, and are we sort of making space for that in our budget for next year?
Well, there are a few things that we do already. They don't have a lot of budget implications. We started last year having some joint faculty staff meetings, you know, in terms of some of the initiatives that we're doing at both schools to make sure that we're on the same page when we get together. We also had a staff holiday party together this year for the first time, so that was fun.
We also, our PACs have started working together proactively, and so
Right.
within 3 days, they sold out their bingo that's coming up in March, so that's.
It's like a good time.
Hopefully it's gonna be a good time.
We do have, our orchestra teacher has already started combining her classes. We have a combined orchestra concert already. And you know, it's nice to be able to get all those kids together. We haven't done more than that in terms of music, but we're on the path.
It's still early days, but since we're talking about the budget for that period of
It's a
time.
great note. Haven't necessarily tied a whole lot of that into the budget, but we are looking for creative ways to be able to do that. Even our student councils have gotten together already and started working collectively as well. So little things are happening organically, and I think that we'll continue to do more of that over the course of the year.
Carrie, we also have started talking about summer programming. What a summer school could look like in terms of, because we have Jill Masters and Elizabeth Ryan on both the elementary and the middle school. And we started discussions of what could this look like, even next summer, just baby steps, but then transitioning to, is there something, you know, that we can offer, even our in-counting for elementary schools going into this one middle school, to really help them and feel welcome and acclimated. So that might have budgetary, but we're working on it.
I think Carrie's on to something though, you know, I think that at this time next year, it'll feel like it's getting very real. So, you know, in between then and now, we should be thinking of what are some of the, you know, just some of the things that will make there a culture be there before the building opens. And, you know, we had a preview of it at a curriculum subcommittee meeting where Jill Masterson and Elizabeth Ryan were there, and gave us some idea of what they did in the summer program. But, you know, at one point, we were talking about, wouldn't it be cool to make some sort of mural that the students could be participating in? And that might have some cost to it too. So it probably isn't a bad idea to be thinking about it now, because it's not like we could do anything right now, but to have a little bit of money for that would be, you know, a good idea. Yeah, yeah.
What do you say?
Okay. So again, level funded budget, but just some of the ups and downs I'll point out. Line 7 is slightly down. That's as a result of my ability to use the RUSO fund rather than operating budget funds for professional development. Line 12, science textbooks, is up slightly, and that is because in FY24 our online subscription for physics books is up, and we need to pay for the next 6 years. This is only a fraction, I believe. Dr. Hahn is going to supplement the other 90% or whatever.
It's in my budget, Steve. Support.
Line 19, business textbooks. The drop there is really as a result of the fact that last year I had the personal finance books in there, and they have now been purchased, and so there are some other textbooks being purchased specifically for marketing in there, but you see that adjustment in line 19. Line 32, slightly up as well. That's mainly as a result of the fact that the new department chair last year didn't know there was such a thing as a budget, so he didn't budget anything. And I had him learn the hard way. And so now he's buying some calculators. Line 69, everything else as I go down through it is pretty even. Slightly up on art supplies in line 51 because she's constantly asking me for extra money, so I decided better come out of the gate with it. Line 69, tech construction software. This is a significant increase, and this is partially because we are upgrading our foreign language lab. So this is the foreign language software and license money, most of what's in there. And you will see the hardware side of that on line 89, which is that pretty significant number, and there is foreign language computers that we're going to put into the lab. So it's a one-off at this point, but I'm able to kind of make it work for the most part this year, so that we can continue to keep it as updated as possible. So if there's any questions?
Just a couple.
Yep.
Considering, I guess I wonder, I know how much speaking and listening is important in the language programs. Is the lab the useful way to do it, or is it better if it's dispersed into the classrooms, I guess, is one question.
We find the lab to be significantly better.
Okay.
Just the structure of it, the way that we can't replicate what you can do in the lab.
Okay.
When teachers able to go in, they're able to randomly have two people have a conversation together with the software that we have in there. We just can't replicate that, and every foreign language class other than Latin does use that almost every day. So
Good.
I wouldn't be funding it like I do if I thought it wasn't being useful, but it really is. It's used constantly.
For people that weren't there when it first became the lab that it now is, we had a high school teacher who was a teacher of the year in Massachusetts, and the lab is named after him. But I remember him coming to our budget meeting with a cassette tape, and he said, like, this is what we used in the previous thing. He said, the kids don't even know what cassette tapes are, but we have to find them to make our computer lab works. I mean, our foreign language lab works. So it's come a long way.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
good. My other question, Steve, is about personal finance. You mentioned that, not so much the cost of it and everything, but are you feeling like we have grown to the place where we have a big waiting list still, or are you meeting the need better than we used to? Like, where are we with that?
We're doing better. We have offered more sections. It is the one area that I think I could fill even further.
Okay.
It's actually something that I'd eventually like to possibly make a graduation requirement for every student to take personal finance.
Yeah.
And we're working towards that
Good.
right now. We've been working towards that for the last year or so. We're not quite there yet, but I think in the next couple of years we'll see that possibly become a graduation requirement at some point over 4 years.
That's great. And especially if we're starting to get to the point where most kids who are asking to take it are fitting it into their schedules. That's good. Thank you.
Yep.
We move on to technology. Sure.
Good evening. My technology budget is primarily a combination of
the software systems that we use to keep our systems up and running. That includes software such as our school information systems, our Google and Microsoft licensing, a lot of our tech support types of software, a little bit of instructional software, although that tends to be software that's used across the entire district as opposed to just grade level software. And then we also have a significant budget portion for our telecommunication, phone systems, our internet systems, those kinds of things. The one thing that is really missing largely out of my budget is replenishment and sustainability for our hardware systems. I do have some money for emergency breakages of an access point here, a server there, those types of things. But I've been running our numbers this past year, looking at the technology we have in the district and the technology that we rely on. I look at about $4.5 million worth of technology. That all has a fairly predictable lifespan. And it is difficult to try to anticipate replacing those types of things without money in our budget. Traditionally, things like large-scale projector replacements or server replacements or switch replacements tended to come out of capital. And that's, trying to fund that out of capital is a difficult process for the town, for us. And we've been slowly trying to move some of that money over into our operating budget to make it more reliable, partly from a replenishment standpoint and partly from a financial standpoint. Years ago, my predecessor in ARPA was able to move the replacement of the wireless access points that we see in the ceiling for our Wi-Fi, put that into our operating budget so that we can get E-rate reimbursement from the federal government. It's been really beneficial to the district to be able to rely on a certain number of those access point replacements every year. In a similar kind of way, I've been working with Mike and we've been working with the town to try to find ways to move other types of replenishment into the operating budget as well. So this year I am looking at an increase in my budget of about $98,000. That represents about $63,000 for projectors. We're expecting projectors to have a lifespan of 8 to 10 years. Optimistically, that means I would want to represent about 10% of my projector fleet. So that would be to replace the oldest 10% of our projectors. Similarly, an increase in money for switch replacements. We have a lot of switches that run our internet systems. Those have a predictable lifespan, and it makes more sense for us to try to replace a small number of those every year rather than ask for a very large amount of money all at once. And then the other larger increase in my budget is for software to manage our archiving our social media. We are slightly out of alignment in compliance for how we archive our social media. As you may know, social media posts that the district or schools use are public record, and we do need to have an archiving system for that in case of freedom of information requests or other types of requests. Any kind of system we have right now is very, very band-aid type of solution. So approximately $6,000 for a platform to bring us into better alignment. The only other thing I would mention from here is the inflation is hitting technology just as much as it's hitting paper. Fortunately, I don't have to put budget eggs into my budget, but all the other things, those kinds of costs are going up. But fortunately, there are some efficiencies I've been able to make in other parts of my budget that were kind of used to offset that. For example, there's a change in the way some of our Microsoft products are being licensed. I've been able to decrease there to kind of help offset some of the inflation. So really, the three elements of projectors, switches, and the archiving system really represent my request for an increase. Any questions?
There's a comment that's, I think this is great to see. I mean, it requires the district to make a significant investment to do this, but pulling these and being able to control some of the costs and not, I think you mentioned, go through a difficult variable capital process is super.
Can you just explain to us about the E-rate reimbursement? Like, is there anything in this budget that qualifies for E-rate reimbursement?
Yes, in my replacement equipment, there is in line 25. there is about $70,000 for replacements of Wi-Fi access points in Foley Glen. That $70,000 is actually closer to probably 110, 120, but we're anticipating a 40% reimbursement from E-rate.
Okay, so you put in what you think the Walpole cost is. Okay. And of the projector switches or archiving social media, that doesn't fit the E-rate, is that correct?
That's correct, that doesn't fit. E-rate is for, essentially it's for Wi-Fi and telecommunications.
Okay. And one other question, not related to this, Tom, but I know that Tech has a Student Data Privacy Alliance. Do we participate in that?
We do. That's part of our subscription with the Education Collaborative.
Right.
So yes, we do participate pretty actively.
And is there anything that you wish the Data Privacy Alliance did that it doesn't do right now? Because I'm on that board and I would be glad to sort of, you know, they're always looking for what's working and what's not working, quite honestly.
To tell you the truth, it works really well for us to be able to track, it works very well for us to be able to add new agreements.
Good.
So if there's another district anywhere in the state, actually in 3 states, right, that has an agreement with a certain piece of software, a teacher in elementary schools that says, I'd like to use that piece of software, I can just go in and say, ooh, us too, click the button, and then we're attached to that data privacy agreement as well. The software is a little bumpy, and I think the collaborative is working to try to get the software itself improved. In terms of the way it works for schools, it works really well for us.
Good. Keep it as a two-way communication, because truly they're always looking for feedback. So, yeah, okay, thank you.
All right, Dr. Wheeler, moving on to special education.
Okay. So I'm going to draw your attention to a few lines that have larger changes from last year. But in doing so, I'm also going to draw your attention to some changes that I've made even since we last spoke on Tuesday. So I'm going to leave that information in single lines. So I'm going to note for you where your books are a little different from where I'm proposing some changes, okay? So the first line I'm going to talk about is line 2. That's our legal line, our legal counsel line. In your books, you have an increase that reflects an $8,000 increase. This is for 2 reasons. One would be volume from the amount of time that we've accessed special ed counsel here in the last year. But 2, the council has indicated to me it intends to increase rates for next year. So those 2 factors led to the increase that I proposed in line 2. In crunching some numbers here in the last week, what I'd like to do is to bring that line down by $4,000. So it is a net increase, but only by $4,000 as opposed to $8,000. Okay. The second line that I wanted to address is line 3. This is legal settlements. We have 1 open settlement in the districts right now. That will end in June. We have no other ones ongoing that I see at this point, so I did not request any money in legal settlement. I'm going to move down to line 11, special ed consulting expenses. This is another one where I'm looking to make a bit of a change. I know on Tuesday night I alluded to a specific situation where I'm monitoring some service for students. And at this point I feel confident enough to make a reduction in special ed consulting services to still address the students' needs without the level of need that I was previously looking at. So, I've adjusted this line down by $28,000. So in your books you have it as a $4,000 increase. I'm now looking at it as a $24,000 decrease. The next line I want to address is line 14. This is special ed tutoring. This is an increase of $10,000. These are students that are hospitalized for any given reason. We have a vendor that travels to the hospitals that provides tutoring service for students when they can't come to school. We also have a handful of students who may be awaiting out-of-district placements, and can't come to school for some reason based on their circumstances. So we provide tutoring to those students. I think the overall story is that access to that service has increased, and so that's why I proposed that increase for this year. When I go to line 28, special ed transportation out of town, I think as we're seeing an increase in referrals from out of district, naturally I think that the special ed transportation would increase as well. This is based on a snapshot of the out of district caseload that we looked at in preparing for this budget. And so that tells us that the $63,500 increase. This line also, just to note, this line also funds foster care students who need transport back to the district from their current foster care placement. It does not do McKinney-Vento, but it does do foster care, so that also comes out of this line. There are students that we do fund in that manner. Sped transportation out of town, this is a decrease of $12,000. And again, this is a snapshot in time of the students that are in our special programs in district and the transportation needs. So these two lines, again, are volatile. They could change day to day. So again, this is just a snapshot in time when the goods and services was prepared. And then lines 40 to 43, I think this is what we really touched on the other night. This is an increase for a number of different reasons. Referrals out of district, the OSD decision across the state that we referred to, increasing private school tuitions by 14%. So overall, between a number of factors, that is an increase of a little over $300,000. Bringing the special ed budget total increase in your book to $315,446. But given the decreases that I listed above, those total $32,000. So the net increase that I would propose would be $283,446.
Could you just repeat the last part? Your summary of where the final lines were.
Sure. So in your book, you have an increase of $315,446. I think with the decrease in the lines above, that totaled $32,000. So a new net increase for this year, I have at $283,446. Thank you.
Can you go through what that 32,000 represents again? Because I noted a decrease of 4,000 for legal and 24 in consulting.
Yes.
Where's the other 4?
So 28 and 4 for 32.
No, 24 and 4.
That's the net decrease in that line. It was up by 4,000.
Oh, okay, I see. Gotcha. Thank you.
So, I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question. This is the part of the special ed budget that comes out of the operating budget, but we have, I guess it would be mainly, is it circuit breaker is the other source of income that you use, or do you use the Title I funding? I mean, the whatever that grant, that big grant is?
So IDEA grants.
Yeah.
That's used more so in the personnel area.
Yep.
It funds exclusively personnel.
Okay.
So that's more, I think, on Mike's side.
Okay.
Circuit breaker gets woven into the private school tuition line.
Right.
So the total obligation we take decrease our anticipated circuit breaker, and that's the number that we list as far as need.
So could you tell us what your total goods and services budget is? Not just the operating budget, but the total?
Yes. 2,906,354, but I haven't subtracted the 32,000.
Okay,
But
yeah. Okay, I guess my other question is, with special ed transportation, do we use our own vans for in-district only, or do we use our vans for out-of-district transportation? And how do you decide what's the best, the smartest thing to do?
Good question. Multi-part answer. So when we started the program, we mostly used it for out-of-district transportation because it was one student going a long way, it was costly, and that was where the best financial savings were. Over time, our in-district contract, the YCN, which is a separate contract, has grown. They caught wind of the fact that, Vanpool is charging this and we're over here, and they've made it a point to catch up, like 23% a year and doing jumps like that. Well, what they didn't realize is they now made themselves comparable to Vanpool in cost. So now Kim Poirier actually switched it up, and she does about 40 students in district, and then those drivers go out of district. So we're actually up them both. Not as much out of district, right, because of timing, but it's more beneficial now for us to do more in-district runs, which are less miles on our vehicles, more frequent pickups, and it's more favorable. So the dynamic has changed with that, and I anticipate it will continue to change. We brought on a couple of vendors that we manage basically a point now, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, but Vanpool and YCN are both full. We've never had a point where they said to us, we can't transport any more kids, and that comes and goes, but
Sure.
I think it's more common than not that they're struggling to place these kids on these vans, at least in a timely way.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The turnaround time for us receiving word that a van is necessary and the ability to start the route is greater than I've ever seen.
So we've actually, our program has become even more critical. In many cases, it's the difference between transporting a student or not being able to. And that was never really an option in prior years with COVID and all the challenges that's created. And they just don't have enough drivers to drive every student. So we've taken over more out of need versus want. That's right.
We were getting to the point, usually when parents would ask me about this, we could turn a van around in a matter of days as far as getting the request, getting it routed, and the pickup times and things like that. That's turned to weeks in certain cases for more difficult routes out of district months. And I think that's again, to your point, Nancy, universal as far as all districts that I'm aware of.
And I think we hit a point with Feeney, because Feeney grows intermittently, and YCN's our main provider of that transportation. They don't have any more vans or drivers, so it's a matter of somebody's got to do it, and it's us in most cases. Sometimes a parent will have to drive until we can create some open, seats for those kids.
Which we do have, particularly for our McKinney-Vento parents. Some choose to drive. We do reimburse them.
Yep.
But there are cases where we simply don't have a van and need to assist us in driving.
Okay, so that answers my question. My question basically was, have you looked at the pros and cons of in-district, out-of-district, and what are some of the challenges you're facing? Because you see that they're looking for bus drivers, regularly yellow bus drivers everywhere, so.
We've been fortunate on that front as well, that Conley's been able to keep up where a lot of districts, Framingham comes to mind, but they can't get kids to school. We struggled. It wasn't a perfect situation, but we were able to, the dispatcher drove or whatever needs to happen until they could get a few more drivers in. We're in a pretty good place right now.
Thanks. One other thing, I'm just thinking about this legislative breakfast coming up, so I'm going to be in touch with you so that we can make sort of a case that makes sense for Walpole, but beyond Walpole too, okay?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yep. Leave the best for last.
I don't know about that, Bill.
All right, so I will review a couple items here and highlight some increases in the budget that I've had. So starting with line item 87, that historically has been very general. I just want to take a second to explain why that's general, because at this point in the year, it is sometimes difficult for us to anticipate where we might see consultation or instructional support. For instance, we're at the just very early stages of a middle school science ELA audit and evaluation, but we anticipate that the results of that will have an impact on how we utilize our instructional contracted services. We do know now that we'll continue to provide support in our second year of Bridges implementation. I anticipate middle school science curriculum, and then we'll continue to evaluate our newest literacy benchmark screener, literacy screeners, assessment screeners to determine further areas of support. Line item 88 we'll skip over, that tends to be primarily our membership fees, and I want to bring your attention to line item 89 where there was an increase. With the addition of Jill Kimball as our ELE coordinator, one of the things she did very early on is complete an evaluation of our translation services, and it was evident almost immediately that there was a need for that. We did know there was a need for that prior to Jill's feedback, of course, just because the language line, which is what we currently use for most of our translation services, at least in phone calls to families and parents, the number was increasing quite rapidly, and so as a leadership team, we started to address that this year. But Mike and I worked together to anticipate a $15,000 increase for those translation services. And one of the things that is important to point out is not only will we likely see an increase in language line use, need for in-person translations at our parent or community nights, but this is not an L cost or an ELE cost. And that's a really important distinction. I think, well, this is actually a civil rights cost. And so it's important to point that out because I think sometimes people confuse the two. While an increase in our L community might require a need for translation, not all of our families and community members who need translation services are our L students or families of our L students. So I just want to make that distinction as we review that increase in line item 89. Line item 92, I won't review in detail just because most of that is driven by the collective bargaining agreement, over $90,000 that we provide to our teachers for their continued graduate work. And the other has been pretty standard in support of professional development and research and development to offset or complement our Title II benefits. Line item 95, it's kind of conveniently broken up into some departments. The first one is a change we made 2 years ago, working with Shannon Finley and our elementary principals. We realized to ensure more equity in our literacy resources, we allocated a district-wide fund to provide support so that it wasn't dependent on PAC funding or on individual principals' operating budgets. And we did the same for DEI last year, and this year we're suggesting the same for our ELE as we continue to build staffing for these programs. We want to provide monetary support. It is interesting that it's under textbooks. It's not often going to be traditional textbooks, but we think that the best representation of curriculum resources or resources they might use to provide support to our staff. You'll also see under line 4 and 5 there, we are anticipating a change in our middle school science curriculum based on the evaluation audit. That's an estimated number. To be honest, it could be more or less depending on the evaluation audit. And then to complement Steve's business text, that line is represented. And finally, line 98, you'll also see a change in an increase in that line item, and that is because, as you know, we applied for a grant for our dyslexia screeners that are actually now currently being mandated at the start of next year. We were an early adopter, so we were able to apply and achieve a grant for our iReady use, and that grant is up at the end of this year. So that represents the cost of that mandated dyslexia
just have two. One is looking at line 98 with the PSAT administration of 9th, 10th, and 11th graders. Can we look into getting feedback as a school for how our students do? Because parents get a boatload of feedback, parents and kids. So there's a way to do it. And I think it would help us to see, which areas we should be focusing on in math. Okay? And then, you pulled out, or you've not pulled out, but you identified 9th grade physics and needing some more resources there. In general, how is it going now that we do all freshmen take physics in 9th grade?
The feedback around that, Mimi and I talked about that quite a bit. Feedback around that is really positive.
Okay.
Like the adoption, and I think that's why you see most districts going to that trend of now offering physics in the first year. That's now all the way through for really full adoption. It would have been a 3-year change in their adoption. Like we had 1.2 biology running, 2 chemistry running. But they couldn't be happier. But they actually see, and I think they talked about this when they first adopted it, first made the change. I guess is a better way to put it. But they also see a better alignment with math curriculum.
That was going to be what I was asking. Is it
Oh, yeah.
turning out the
Yeah.
way they thought it might?
Yeah, the Algebra 1 and the physics match up a lot better than general science or bio honors that we used to be aligned with.
Okay.
Yeah, that's been really positive. And like I said, I shouldn't even say it's a trend because actually most districts have gone that direction, but that most districts are going in this direction.
Question about the IREC versus Forefront. When you mentioned it, because I know you guys had mentioned adding Forefront
Yeah.
as a data collection. How does that complement or work with IREC?
Sure. So, okay, I'll do my best to explain this, because in fairness, it is confusing.
Yep.
We currently utilize iReady as a screener and benchmark for K-5 literacy and for 6 to 8 math.
Okay.
We do not use it for K-5 math because the Bridges curriculum has unit benchmarks that we implement with Fidelity. And we decided to partner with Frontline, which is a software tech resource that teachers utilize to make better sense of the unit benchmarking. I think I summarized that well. So they're not, Frontline doesn't give an assessment.
Sure.
They help organize the assessments we give to Bridges. Whereas iReady is a standalone benchmark.
All right, ready to finish this up? All right, so on the central services budget, going to line 16, business and finance, office supplies, you can see reflected in that line item, the inflation that I think we've heard a lot of tonight. So we've increased that number by $4,000 to make sure that we have the funding for the supplies that we use to operate the central office. Going down to our biggest item in this list is the lines 32, 33, 34, which are all transportation related. Although I don't have the contract out yet to the street for yellow buses for next year, I did speak to Connolly Bus. All this information is public and they generally hold to a consistent increase for all towns. So the indication I got from Steve Sullivan, who's basically running Connolly Bus at this point, is that it would be a 4% increase. So I built the 4% into the budget, which dropped our goods and service number initially. You have the updated version, but it was higher initially on the estimates. Homeless, transportation, we got some indications that there are a few riders that we were concerned about when we were building the budget. So we added 20,000 in there because they don't want to be caught short with homeless transportation funding for a few particular cases that we have that were the concern was raised. If that drops down again next year, we'll drop that budget down. I don't want to be exposed. And athletic transportation also incurs the same increase as the traditional yellow bus contract, which is 4% increase as well, which gives you that 57,424 increase there. And then on the next page, superintendent advertising, we found that the costs were going down for a variety of reasons. I think we're using software that we used to use advertising in newspapers and things of that sort, which was really expensive. So we're able to drop that budget by $7,000 to offset the decrease there. And then our insurance goes up every year for school board liability. And that increase, we generally lag it by 1 year, so I keep up with what it costs and front the money in the initial year. So the increase is up to that $26,757, and increase to $6,757 on that line item. So given that, those increases, that gives you your central budget increase.
Just looking at the school board insurance percentage, that's a big size percentage considering we've behaved pretty well. Like,
I think the same thing, but I don't think everyone does. So, think about it, it's the global picture. Right?
Okay, it's not specific to all.
I wish it were.
It's taking it a little personally.
Right, it would be a huge cost savings for us.
Right?
That's right.
Okay, that makes sense.
Your record.
I just wanted to know in terms of personnel, we spoke a little bit about that at the beginning. And Nancy mentioned last year at this time, looking at my notes, that we requested $1.3 million. It was actually 14.5 positions, because included in that was the free full day K.
That's true.
At that point, so this year, we're requesting an increase of 1.5. What that consists of directly supports our special education in-district program. So one position is to support the program at Elm Street School, because that enrollment needs to be tiered to lower grade levels versus your upper grade levels. And then the other has to do with the teacher or to support the needs at one particular elementary school because of the numbers, the sheer numbers. With 2.0 team chairs to be shared level 4 elementary schools, this would be an increase of 0.5, 1.0, because the elementary principals along with Dr. Beal work on some reorganization. That's what we're looking at. That's it. And that will give you your total school request of 538,500. I don't know if you want to mention that we do have ESPs throughout the year. I think we talked about that Tuesday, but.
So there is a report that you don't have in your budget books that will be coming, which is what we call personnel budget, or the FTE report, either one. Doug, for the finance committee, you guys get this reporting. And it basically shows the growth in FTEs by category as reported by DESE. So we try to mirror their categories so that we can reconcile back to their reporting. And I think initial look at that ESP level, I just wrote some notes here, that it's been a struggle meeting the increased needs of students with special needs as well as COVID-related learning loss. So obviously the federal government and the state government has given a lot of support in the form of grants and one-time money to support these needs that we've paid for ESPs or other support personnel with some of the grant funding. We've also been cognizant of the fact that this will go away, and we don't want to wind up with an overwhelming round of layoffs. But I think when we look at that report, you'll see that there's been a sizable increase in the level of ESPs. It can all be explained. We're looking at it very closely to understand every one of those moves. I think John and his group look very closely to make sure that where we're increasing ESPs is absolutely needed. Every conversation involves the central leadership, the principals, John, Julie, everyone, when these requests come through. We scrutinize all of them. But it is a substantial increase that you'll see. So we'll be sharing that in the next week or two with the school committee. So it'll show where we are in '23 and where we're going in '24 based on our current request. And it's an absolute reconciliation of the road and the school.
And we know we have that gap between our recommendation and the town administrator's recommendation. Continue doing due diligence and working to see where we can close that gap. And it's up to the school committee to vote next Thursday.
Just talking about the personnel reminds me, considering 80-some-odd% of our budget is personnel, I know you're going to give us the FTE report, but I think we need some context to it too. You know, something that just gives the general picture. For example, we did a new set of collective bargaining, and we were particularly challenged, I would say, this time because, you know, we want our teachers to remain competitive, but we were also really aware of budget limitations. So I think that like before our budget goes to other people, we should add some context to that. And maybe we can all be thinking about how to do that. But I think that's, you know, this doesn't tell our story. And when people say you want your budget to tell your story, I think we need a little bit of work in that way.
I think it's the one time that we really get in the weeds about every increase, decrease, because it's all substantial, it's all dollars behind every movement.
Right.
And that's our most critical reconciliation of the budget.
Yeah.
Just, I think, you know, we don't have to get into that whole discussion now, but part of the story is the long tail of COVID, right? Like, what's going on with early intervention and special ed referrals, what's going on with inflation, what's going on with transportation, and, you know, the ability for our partners and for us to hire who we need to hire. You know, all of this is in the landscape, and it's bigger than our district, and I think that's a huge part of the story about why this budget looks the way it does.
Yeah, and I think in some cases, the labor supply was so tight, right, it was only a short time ago, you couldn't get these individuals, so in some cases you had to be
To that point, I know some of the ESPs were going through a service to get, since we couldn't hire, so I don't know if that's part of the conversation with the reconciliation. Other questions? Should we open it up to our citizens?
Absolutely.
Any questions, Doug?
No, just comments. I appreciate you guys all sitting here and discussing this. It's very good to hear. Sometimes it gets lost in the notes. You know, we don't get a ton. But I appreciate hearing the conversation. So thank you all for your input. When it comes to kind of preparing your budget, I got your FTE report from last year. Some of the things that I like to hear from the finance committee side are the things that are kind of mandated, like the collective bargaining increase. You were mentioning that on Tuesday. It's kind of good to know when it's not something that you're increasing. You know, hearing that all the budgets are level funded, that's good to hear as well. So I think that's mainly it, but I appreciate you allowing me to be here in this public process. It's very good to hear the conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for representing the public.
Yeah.
And I know this is helpful to have somebody from Finance Committee have this extra layer of...
I really just wanted to get out of swim practice. We've got a camera on tonight. Hopefully my wife's not watching.
Karen, make a motion to close the budget public hearing.
Second. Motion by Carrie, second by Nancy. All those in favor? 500.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Nancy, second by Carrie. All those in favor? 500. Thank you.